This is Katana Zero, a game that asks the question, what do the soldiers fight for when there's no war left to fight? Katana Zero is an indie action platformer developed by ASCIIsoft and published by Devolver Digital for Mac, Switch and Windows in 2019. It came to Xbox One a year later in 2020 and has ports to additional systems still in the works. The game has the player take control of an amnesiac war veteran who also happens to be a time-manipulating samurai, but more on that later. It was conceived as the first commercial game for indie developer Justin Stander, who had previously worked on freeware titles like Tower of Heaven and Pause Ahead. Stander chose to develop a retail game when he noticed the success of VVV, an indie game by Terry Kavanagh in 2010. Like Stander, this was Kavanagh's first paid game after working on several freeware releases, but despite having a price of entry, it became his most successful title. Stander came to the conclusion that audiences only pay attention to indie games that were being sold, maybe believing that in some way an indie game having a price tag indicated a higher level of quality to the players. And so he aimed to create an experience that could not only be sold commercially, but also tell a captivating story. And nothing says captivating quite like a samurai John Wick going full That's So Raven. Stander began working on Katana Zero in his spare time as a university student from 2013 under the studio name ASCIIsoft. After he graduated in 2015, he made the switch to full-time development with a budget of $60,000 USD, an amount much lower than the norm for a game of Katana Zero's scope. Because of this, the game was made mostly single-handedly in Game Maker Studio 2, with a few additional members being brought onto the project later to help with the game's art, music, and writing. During development, one of Stander's main goals was to make sure that killing felt exciting and satisfying. He thought that modern games were too forgiving and that enemies felt too weak compared to the player. So he decided that Katana Zero would be difficult and that death would come easily. But at the same time, he didn't want it to feel unfair and instead wanted to encourage players to recognize their mistakes and overcome them through subsequent attempts. It's because of this that Stander carried over his design philosophy from his previous games, leading to a one-hit kill combat system for the player and most enemies, with bosses being the exception. This run-and-gun, so to speak, style of gameplay has been compared to Hotline Miami, another Devolver Digital published game, which Stander says is just a coincidence. But despite the fast pace of the gameplay, it was always a driving force for Stander that Katana Zero had a cinematic feel to its story when developing the game. And if you ask me, he managed to do it pretty well for a game that doesn't have any spoken dialogue besides. The writing for the game was heavily inspired by a mix of Eastern and Western movies, with Stander wanting a vulnerable yet lethal protagonist in the style of Korean revenge thrillers. Movies that influenced the character and world design of Katana Zero include Oldboy, Sin City, Drive, John Wick, along with Seven Samurai by Akira Kurosawa and various Quentin Tarantino films, for their invincible yet human characters and depictions of stylistic violence set over a dark, grimy, neon-coded setting. To help further immerse players into the game's story, Katana Zero uses a dialogue tree system that Stander conceived for a role-playing game that never came to fruition. After being reworked into Katana Zero, it let the player interact with spoken dialogue to give them more agency and help characterize the protagonist to their liking. For example, here, where you need to get past a hotel receptionist. You can do this by either pretending to be a cosplayer, which will appeal to her interests and she'll let you through, or you can antagonize her by being extremely rude in your responses, which will just really ruin her day. Poor girl. Oh, but doing this can get you shot though. This system also gives the game a good amount of replayability. Depending on how you approach various NPCs in the game, you can get unique responses that even affect the story in minor ways, but regardless of your choices, the larger overall story remains the same. Or does it? As for the game's reception, it was Devolver's most pre-ordered Switch game, selling over 100,000 copies within a week of release, and became the second best-selling eShop game during the month after its release, right behind Cuphead. The game scored 7 to 9s across the board from various publications like IGN and Destructoid, being praised for its exciting gameplay, aesthetic visuals, and compelling writing, though the story itself left some divided due to having various elements left up to the player's interpretation. Speaking of, there are going to be light spoilers for the story from here on out, but I'll refrain from talking about anything major until later into the video, which I'll give a warning for. So, let's get started. The story opens with an ominous message displaying 10 days remain, before cutting into a conversation about something to do with the men in masks. After one of the speakers fails to respond, the other encourages them to start from the beginning, and so, after a fade-in, we're met with an armed man standing on the rooftop of a decrepit-looking city when... we're introduced to Zero and his time-bending abilities. As we progress through the story, we learn that this ability is related to Zero's altered perception of time, which allows him to react to situations in slow motion, and is a core mechanic of the game. Zero receives a call revealing that he is on a mission to infiltrate an enemy factory and rescue a scientist being held hostage. It's here that we get the first example of the game's dialogue tree system. You can let the phone call play out by responding appropriately or continuously hang up on the caller to really make them regret their life choices. For now, let's be nice and go along with the call. Zero is instructed to leave no survivors by using his precognition to tackle anyone in his way, an ability that we'll see in just a moment. So with that, Zero makes his way into the factory and cue the appropriately dramatic title drop. As you probably noticed, Katana Zero showcases a pixel art style which was specifically inspired by a neo-noir aesthetic, with the visuals achieved through the combination of highly detailed sprite work blended with neon lighting. It was mentioned by Stander that getting the completed look together was challenging, as several of the artists he did hire left partway through the project for various reasons. But regardless, the team he ended up with was what motivated him to finish the game, and as you'll see through Katana Zero's beautifully crafted 11 stages, he found the right team for the job. These stages are made up of several rooms that need to be cleared of enemies to progress, very reminiscent of old school beat-em-ups like Streets of Rage. Playing in each level is a song from the synthwave soundtrack composed by Justin Stander, Bill Kiley, and Ludowick, setting the mood before the action begins. It was mentioned earlier that Zero has some kind of precognition. This is actually used to frame the gameplay in each room as a possible outcome seen through his abilities, with every death treated as a failed future. And so if you aren't some kind of badass and you do die, the game rewinds the player back to a checkpoint until it can be cleared without getting hit. You'll know you've succeeded when a bright appears on screen and you get the message, yes, that should work, when leaving the area. After successfully clearing a room, a black and white replay of your run is shown from the perspective of a security camera, with any deaths or use of Zero's time manipulation not being shown, giving you an idea of what your enemies saw when they fought you.
He's so cool. He's so cool.
Zero's gameplay is simple. He can Naruto run, dodge, and wall jump. As for attacks, he has two main options. The first is a single slash that can one-shot all enemies except for bosses and deflect bullets. And the second is the hand, which lets you pick up and throw objects so hard they kill enemies in one hit as well. Something to remember is that Zero has a cooldown after each slash which can be cancelled by rolling. This is pretty much required knowledge in the game's hard and speedrun modes. And of course, he can also slow down time, giving the player more wiggle room to react to enemies or the environment, but you can only do this until your meter is drained. Once it runs out, time will resume as normal, so make sure you keep that in mind. I like it that the sound effects and the music also get distorted to help solve the effects. While the overall gameplay is pretty simple, Stander made sure to keep things interesting by introducing new elements throughout the game to, quote, really mess with the player? Okay. And for what it's worth, it does help to keep the gameplay interesting for the entirety of Katana Zero's 4 or so hours of playtime. As you reach the end of the first stage, you'll find the scientist that you were tasked to rescue beaten and barely alive, and after a brief conversation with them, you begin an escort mission. Now, along with navigating through the stage's hazards at Zero, you also have to... oh. Like Stander said, really mess with the player. The first level having an escort mission fake out works to tell us to expect the unexpected, but it also serves as an introduction to one of the game's major antagonists, V, someone we'll be seeing more of throughout the story. After escaping from the factory, the man on the phone expresses dissatisfaction about the failure of the mission and we're told to go home and rest, so we do just that. Throughout the game, we'll be playing two types of segments. The more action-oriented stages like the one we just experienced, and the slower-paced intermissions between them. It's in these intermissions that we get a closer look at Zero, and how his relationships with various characters develop with the story. Back at Zero's apartment, you can see that he's kind of a weeb. There isn't too much to do here, but you can turn on the TV, which will give you news reports on the previous level, which change depending on your dialogue choices. After drinking his herbal tea, Zero crashes on his couch, somehow sleeping through the neighbors who are just really having a good time. He dreams of a boy playing catch with someone we can't quite make out before another figure enters the room and distorts into a monstrous visage, rushing towards the child. The nightmare shakes Zero awake the next morning and we get hit by another countdown. 9 days remain. The dream is our first look into Zero's unstable psyche, which will become a growing focus as the game continues, and nothing makes that more clear than the very next scene where we see him speak with his psychiatrist. As it turns out, he was the one on the phone in the factory, and while playing the role of his psychiatrist, he also acts as Zero's handler. The two talk about how Zero has been responding to his reduced medicine, and whether or not he's still experiencing hallucinations, which is concerning. It's a question that Zero can respond to by telling him that his nightmares have returned, which is also concerning. They go on to discuss the nightmare, attempting to piece together what to make of it, and conclude that the figure in the dream must have been trying to reach a machine on the far side of the room. Satisfied with their progress, the psychiatrist gives Zero his medicine, which seemingly distorts time when administered. Now that we've had a chat with a nice man, he asks us to take a dossier on the way out with details on our next assassination target. I'm starting to think that he isn't a normal psychiatrist. These dossiers are given to Zero throughout the game, but not only highlights the objectives of the next level, but also provides clues for what's happening in the story. Our first target is Josh Rose, a billionaire philanthropist and chairman of the New Mecca Foundation for Post-War Reconstruction, involved in the movement of war-related materials and drugs. With the target confirmed, we burn the dossier as instructed and begin the mission. We convince a receptionist that we're cosplaying as Shinji Sakamura from X vs X Sakura Redux 2, flaunt our weeb elitism in her face, and make our way up the tower. Along the way, we overhear a conversation about a terrifying foe named Strong Terry. But this isn't the time to stop and think, so we carry on until we reach the penthouse. We fight our way past armed guards, throw a few cleavers and dodge past a few lasers before reaching the target. Oops. So during this section, you're supposed to approach Josh Rose and have a conversation with him, but because I already played this on the Switch, I instinctively threw this bust into the back of his head, completing the hit. You can see the exact moment where I realized that I messed up. So, let's do this one last time. Except this time we're a jerk to the receptionist, which I still feel bad about. We run up the tower, deflect some bullets, and confront Josh Rhodes without bludgeoning him to death first. As it turns out, he was expecting someone to come for him, but he wasn't expecting Zero. He's surprised that there's more than one of him left, which confuses the poor cosplayer. This prompts Josh to ponder how Zero is unaware of what he is, but he ends up brushing him off as another mistake from the war. After we ask Josh if he has any last words, he says that he shows remorse for the pain he inflicted through Zero, and then definitely nails a superhero landing on the street below. Zero makes his way back down the hotel, and on the way out, he is confronted by a police officer who was called in for reports of gunfire. Depending on how you treated the receptionist earlier, she'll explain that you're in cosplay and help you pass through, although unintentionally, or leave you to fend for yourself. This has a bit of an impact on what happens later in the game, so I'll avoid talking about it until we reach full spoilers. After Zero returns home and is ready to take off his cosplay, he's assaulted by a feral child. And by that I mean she bumps into him, insults his home, calls him boring, and pieces out. There's something that I want to bring up now because it happens a lot with the little girl's dialogue in particular, and is that the game has animated and colored text to help convey emotions. It's a detail I really enjoy because despite how simple it is, it's really effective at giving you an idea of these characters' personalities. So when the little girl threatens to kick your butt, you know exactly how she said it. After getting thoroughly harassed, Zero returns to his room where we can see that his neighbors decided to have a less active night. It's strange that we can see their silhouettes on the left and nothing on the right though, but oh well. Zero drinks his tea, has another nightmare, 8 days remain, and is back to the psychiatrist's office we go. Like with the previous session, the two work on making sense of the dream. They deduce that the strange figure must have been a scientist trying to warn Zero before someone else walks in and shoots him. The psychiatrist suggests the possibility that these dreams are related to one of Zero's traumatic memories from before he suffered a head injury during the war, which led to memory loss and a distorted perception of time. He continues by encouraging Zero that the service medal he carries is an important reminder of his sacrifices and a crucial link to his past. Moving on, the two begin to discuss Zero's social life, where he describes how he was attacked by a feral child the previous night. And while the psychiatrist is happy that Zero is seemingly making friends, he's left confused, as Zero's home, which is located in the 3rd district, is known to be unsafe for children, and because of that, they generally don't live there. But he takes his word for it, and after giving him his medicine, he provides a new dossier with the next target. This time for a DJ known as Electrohead, who is involved in the trafficking of club drugs. We're instructed by the dossier that he's a pathological liar and that we are not to speak to him. Okay, that's easy enough. There aren't too many enemies in the first part of the level, but we do need to stealth past them by blending in with clubgoers to avoid causing a commotion. After clearing the dance floor, we encountered the fabled Strong Terry and... yeah. So we pay our respects by giving him a moment of silence. Then we slash our way deeper into the club, watch a slender Rich's promotion into a skinny Ricky, murder him and his friends, and confront Electrohead. Remember, we were told not to talk to him, so we kill him on sight and leave the club, but as we depart we catch another glimpse of V, who seems to be leaving as well. If you're curious about what happens if you do speak to him, I'll cover it later in the video when I get into full spoilers and theories. After getting home, we're once again confronted by the gremlin, but this time she has a friend. She introduces us to her toy Behemoth, who she says glows red when it gets close to his brother, Leviathan. And because Behemoth is glowing near our door, it must mean that we're hiding Leviathan somewhere in our apartment. So after she threatens us with violence, we relent and let the child in. She calls us a pushover, insults our home, and now that our emotions have been thoroughly beaten, we begin our search for Leviathan. After scouring the apartment using Behemoth as a tracker, we find his brother under the couch, but Zero isn't sure how it got there and suggests that maybe the previous tenant must have left it behind. The child decides to let us keep Leviathan, threatens us with violence again, and pieces out. That night, Zero's dream take an interesting turn. After the gunman shoots the scientist, they toss the second figure, who resembles a little girl, into the machine at the far end of the room, transforming her into the Leviathan toy that we were looking for. Okay, I'm not too sure what to make of that. During our next session with the psychiatrist, we're praised for following his instructions with our quick dispatch of Electrohead, after which Zero is given his medicine. But before we're dismissed, we're told that the media has taken to calling him the Dragon following his string of killings. The psychiatrist thinks it's an impressive name, but he encourages Zero to lay low to avoid bringing more attention to them. And with that, our next target is Fa Yuan, a political dissident responsible for leaking something that's been redacted. The dossier tells us that he's scheduled in a military tribunal and must be eliminated while minimizing collateral damage, so stealth is required. No problems here, I've played Metal Gear. Zero arrives at the prison housing Fa Yuan. We sneak past these searchlights until we realize that being seen by them doesn't do anything, so we make our way into the compound. Once inside, we see several guards with no way around them, so we have no choice, time for CQC. We kick open the door and... it turns out someone got here before us. Zero turns off his music and investigates the building. When he finally reaches Fa Yuan's cell, he discovers that he's already dead and his body is still warm. A swarm of police cars surround the building, forcing Zero to escape while doing his best to remain undetected to complete the mission. On his way home, Zero encounters a homeless veteran who calls out to him for his medicine, saying that he's owed for his service in the war and for the killings of people known as Cro-Mags. After attempting to pass him by, he accuses Zero of being a Cro-Mag or a sympathizer, and when we attempt to show him our service medal, what's interesting is, if you go against the dossier and kill the guards in the prison, you can actually stop this from happening, though I don't know why. When Zero gets back to his apartment building, he's confronted again by the little girl, but this time she was asked to give him something. A videotape from a man who she says has strange hair. You can choose to either let her in and watch it with you, or tell her to go home. I did the irresponsible thing and let her watch. The tape is a recording of Zero's noisy neighbors and their encounter with V, who is shown torturing them for disturbing the rest of the tenants in the building. The men are injected with a familiar substance before having their fingers mutilated with wire cutters. I told the little girl to go home before it got too bad, by the way. We see that V believes he was doing Zero a favor out of respect for his work as the Dragon. We finally notice the silence next door. And with a disturbing realization that this man has been watching us, Zero goes to sleep, his nightmares getting worse. The next day, we see that the psychiatrist's office is closed, so Zero finds himself walking down the streets of New Mecca when a Hummer limo pulls up next to him, requesting his presence. Inside the car is V with a few friends. I'm sure they're all nice people. He's quick to praise Zero as the Dragon and flaunts his handiwork in the tape we viewed the night before, fishing for approval, but we reject him. The conversation then steers towards... well, I don't think Sakurai would approve of this scene, seeing as we're all good boys and girls. So let's just say after we refuse V's offer of recreational fun to hurt his pride, Zero gets kicked out of the limo. He gives chase on foot, which leads him to a movie studio where we see V speaking to someone named Snow over the phone. We overhear that he was originally supposed to try and recruit Zero, but that didn't work out very well. Zero confronts V by deflecting his gunshot, causing him to flee into the studio. Here we ride minecarts and not Indiana Jones, teach a robot to love in a sci-fi world which gets it killed unfortunately, and destroy Not Pyramid Head and Quiet Hills, all for 3 key cards that finally gets us to the back of the studio where we find V. The two start fighting, and after smacking V around for a bit, Zero comes out the victor. But before he can deal the killing blow, he's interrupted by another samurai. She identifies Zero's battle stance as being Shin Kage Ryu, which translates to True Shadow Dragon. There isn't much more to it than that, but at least it sounds cool. We learn that this female samurai is Snow, the one V was speaking to over the phone, and as we get ready for a fight, she and V disappear in a shower of cherry blossoms, leaving us thoroughly confused. After returning home and drinking our herbal tea, we hear a knock at the door. The gremlin child bursts in, wrapped in a bathrobe dressed as Zero for Halloween, and demands candy for trick-or-treat. And okay, that's pretty dang cute, she gets candy. I was lucky enough to find her chocolate sticks in the pantry, but do know that you can end up giving her a fish head if you look in the wrong place. And just to be clear, while I do call her a gremlin, I do find the little girl adorable, and don't wish fish heads upon her. And with that, it's time for the major spoilers warning. From here on out, we'll be going over the rest of the story as well as the game's secrets and some theories. So if you want to play the game for yourself, you've been warned. After the little girl leaves with her Halloween candy, Zero goes to bed, but tonight he's visited by a duo wearing a gold and silver mask, calling themselves Comedy and Tragedy respectively. They claim that they drugged his tea, paralyzing him, and begin to speak of a cryptic decision that Zero will need to make in 3 days' time, where he will need to choose either life or death. But they say whichever he picks, they'll take the other one away. And with that, 4 days remain. Zero gets jolted awake, but before he can catch his breath, he suddenly finds himself in the psychiatrist's office, with no recollection of how or when he arrived. After pressing for answers and not receiving anything more in return than a or ah, Zero questions if the psychiatrist is even listening at all, to which he lashes out and... Zero finds himself back at the office, the psychiatrist having given him an increased dosage of his medicine to compensate for missing the previous day. And with that, Zero is free to go. His next target, Al-Qasim, founder and CEO of Neotech, a military logistics consultancy with close ties to the New Mecha government and involved with military R&D. Zero traverses across the rooftops of New Mecha, arriving at the manor of his target, when he spots V through the building's skylight. Crashing through, he confronts the gangster who flees as the armed guards cover his escape. A chase begins as Zero fights his way through the building, cutting down numerous enemies until sometime after, when his precognition fails and he is caught in a trap, knocking him unconscious. Zero wakes up without his sword and tied to a chair, and shortly after, he's shot by V. Zero wakes up again, tied to the same chair, and through a continuous loop of speaking to V and getting shot, we eventually get enough information that we shouldn't know to catch him off guard. V laughs as he realizes that Zero didn't come to Alcazim's manor for something known as Kronos, but rather, whatever it was, he is already using it. After asking Zero how many times V has already killed him, a muffled voice rings out from the corner of the room. It belongs to our target, Alcazim, someone with the knowledge about the creation process of Kronos, information that V has been interrogating him for to no success. But now that he knows Zero has been using Kronos, he tries to interrogate him instead. But as the conversation continues and he realizes that Zero himself doesn't even know what Kronos is, V shoots him again. Zero wakes up, but this time he's ready to clap back, immediately attacking V's pride and getting under his skin. In a fit of rage, he turns his gun to Alcazim and fires, unintentionally completing our hit. With his outburst leaving him exhausted, V hands Zero to the hooded man with the axe standing behind him, Mr. Kissyface. Yeah, I don't know. And with a well-timed dodge, Zero frees himself from his confines, retrieves his sword, and engages in combat. I'd say that this is probably the first actual boss fight in the game. There was that one earlier with V back at the studio, but that can end whether or not you actually hit him, so I don't really think it counts. But in the fight with Mr. Kissyface, Zero needs to knock him down and clash blades enough times to fill a meter to disarm him. After which, Zero will take the win. Outside the building, we see Snow admonishing V for his poor handling of Alcazim, but praises his defeat of Zero. Well, isn't she going to be surprised? Snow remarks that her encounter with Zero at the studio made her realize that he was a man with no soul and no remorse for others or himself. Continuing her praise of V, she says that she is proud that he could defeat such a foe, because the dragon wasn't an ordinary null, a term we'll learn more about soon. Snow receives a summon from their boss and disappears in another shower of cherry blossoms. V's reaction to how sharp they are is pretty funny and makes me think of Byakuya from Bleach. Snow even kinda looks like him. As V finally gets a chance to relax, one of his men comes flying out a nearby window, with Zero kicking the door down shortly after. The two jump in a pair of nearby motorbikes and a high-speed chase ensues. In his pursuit of V, Zero dispatches numerous enemies over highways, through tunnels, and down the streets of New Mecca, causing chaos throughout the city, but also picking up trash along the way, so it's a fair trade. Zero catches up to V and knocks him off his bike, sending him flying through the air, but luckily a helicopter is there to catch him, beginning our final encounter with the gangster. We weave between missiles and deflect bullets back at the helicopter until eventually it comes crashing into the highway. Now with V bleeding out and unable to run, we're finally going to get some answers. He explains that his pursuit of Zero is nothing new and that he had killed 6 Null before him, which is what got him hired to take Zero out. There it is again. Null. V points his gun at Zero and ridicules his moniker of the Dragon, exclaiming that if he thinks of himself as one, then V is the Dragon Slayer. The true dragon appears, cutting V's arms off and capturing him while Zero flees. After receiving a call from the psychiatrist scolding him about the mayhem he caused on the highway, Zero visits a bar in the 3rd District, where we learn that New Mecca had actually lost the war 7 years ago. He attempts to join in on the conversation between 2 veterans by showing them his medal, but they're doubtful that he actually served because of how young he looks. They call him baby-faced and say that only junkies and veterans live in the 3rd District, but decide to humor him. As the conversation continues, we learn that the troops of New Mecca were pulled out of the battlefield after the residents of the 1st District protested against the child casualties in the war. One of the men speaks to Zero about government-made psychics who were deployed in the war as super soldiers capable of killing people by the thousands. He attributes their abilities to the use of some kind of drug which allows them to see the future or read minds, and blames them for the poor treatment of veterans after they return from the war, but the other man brushes it off as a conspiracy theory. After a few more drinks, Zero is left to stagger home when the child appears. In his debilitated state, Zero can't quite make out what she's saying, so he passes her by and collapses in his room. He's woken up on the next morning by the little girl knocking at his door. It turns out she was actually asking Zero for help, explaining that her dad's friends came over and she didn't have anywhere to go, so she hid under the stairs with Behemoth for the night, missing dinner in the process. Zero, being the good guy that he is, offers to make her some breakfast and has a look around. Okay, that's cute. He finds her a can of protein paste and well... yeah, sorry is probably right. Zero lets the girl stay in his apartment for the day and he makes his way to the office. Just walking through the door, we can tell that this isn't going to be a very productive session. The psychiatrist lashes out at Zero about the previous day's joyride across the city, and as he's getting an earful, Zero suddenly finds himself tied against a chair once more, confronted by an armless V. They talk about the withdrawal symptoms of Kronos, with V describing the effect as time stopping and being stuck in your own mind with nothing but nightmares to keep you company. An unending torture where even if the body is dead, the mind suffers for eternity. Which is another thing that reminds me of Bleach. Huh. Zero is snapped out of it when he's given his medicine, and I think at this point we have a pretty clear picture of what's happening with these distortions. They're just as the hallucination of V says, withdrawal symptoms of Kronos. The psychiatrist instructs Zero to take the next dossier on the way out, using the name Dragon ironically while doing so to mock his lack of professionalism, to which Zero corrects him, saying that the name doesn't refer to him but someone he met on the highway. While in disbelief at first, the psychiatrist asks for this individual's appearance, and after Zero describes him as a tall, blonde swordsman, he believes that this may be someone that they've been looking for. Taken aback by this revelation, he assigns Zero with a new task: eliminate the individual known as the Dragon. Alright, no worries. So Zero enters the last known location of his target, a high-profile casino in Chinatown. Here we need to get 100,000 tokens in order to enter the VIP room in the back, but who has time to gamble fairly, so we use our abilities to cheat and just rob this man blind. Although we end up one chip short, good thing Lenny the Lenient is on duty, so we get through with no problems. We see the Dragon is speaking to a masked woman about V as he seeks her help in getting revenge against those who turn them into weapons. They realize that with Al-Qasim, the only source of Kronos, dead, they don't have much time left. But before they can finish their conversation, our babyface cosplayer kicks open the door to raise some hell. The masked woman tells the Dragon to leave Zero to her, only for both of their abilities to cancel each other out. Zero believed that he had cut her down, while the masked woman saw herself shoot him to death. After the confusion forces her to retreat, Zero picks up a videotape from the room and makes his escape from Chinatown. He maneuvers past dozens of armed officers and drones until he eventually finds himself surrounded. Time comes to a crawl and the masked men comedy and tragedy appear before him. The choice they spoke about 3 days prior has come, and the player will need to choose what happens next, life or death, and whichever is chosen, the other is taken away. This is where the game splits into its two endings, but really only one of them continues the story. If you choose death, the police will gun Zero down, giving him a true death that somehow circumvents the eternity of torture caused by Kronos' withdrawal. The credits will roll and the payoff is that the police officers and others close to Zero will get to live. So to actually save the rest of the game, you need to choose life. The police officers are mysteriously killed and Zero is free to leave, but the masked men warn of a consequence that will affect those around him. Similarly, the psychiatrist will call Zero soon after about the chaos he caused in Chinatown, and speak of dire consequences for his recklessness. Once home, Zero finds that his apartment has been cleaned up by the little girl, and as a nice change of pace, the two go to a movie rental to pick something to watch. And because we know that Zero is a weeb, of course he had some samurai movies waiting for him. So they head home, the child gets traumatized and eventually goes to sleep. Zero uses this chance to watch the tape that he picked up from the casino, and this is when we take control of Katana Zero's second playable character, the Dragon. That's right, Zero gets his very own Virgil, and you don't even need to buy a special edition to play as him. In terms of functionality, he plays like Zero but is noticeably faster and has a teleporting slash that slows time, letting him quickly dash through multiple enemies. This stage has you play through the events of the prison level right before Zero's arrival to get the full context of what happened. We see that the Dragon questioned Fa Yuan for names of people related to Kronos. He learned of Al-Qasim and that the government isn't the one trying to bring it back. But most importantly, he's told of a man named Leon von Alvensleben, the creator of Kronos. After getting what he needed, the Dragon finishes the job. 2 days remain. As Zero approaches the psychiatrist's office, he gets a call from an unknown individual, giving him the location of Leon. Deciding that his time would be better spent tracking him down instead of being lectured, he heads to a slaughterhouse in the 3rd district. As we travel through the compound, we receive messages from a man who appears to be Leon, broadcasting himself on monitors throughout the building. We learn that the facility was once used as a testing ground for the Null project, where suitable candidates were subjected to tests to measure their capabilities. After fighting past the guards and clearing the final trial, we're told that there are 3 types of Null: Alpha, Beta, and Gamma, with each one having a higher survival rate than the last. And because Zero successfully cleared all the trials, he is identified as a Gamma Null by Leon. These were Null created by giving a subject Kronos from childhood and trained to be New Mecha's ultimate soldier, one whose mastery over time and combat made them a god of the battlefield. But because New Mecha ended up losing the war, Null is considered a failure by Leon, and so he destroys the remaining stock of Kronos in his possession to start anew. Determined for more answers, Zero travels further into the facility, bypassing the slaughterhouse's security until he reaches the final room. There he finds a machine playing back the messages we've been seeing throughout the level, revealing that they were pre-recorded. And at the back of the room stood a single cryopod holding the true Leon von Alvensleben, who upon release rapidly ages and dies. I like how Zero just nopes out of there. The psychiatrist isn't impressed that Zero abandoned their session and once again berates him, but Zero doesn't care about that anymore. He returns home to the little girl who was waiting to show him something cool, and so she takes him up to the roof. The little girl expresses her desire to see the whole city one day, but Zero refuses. Instead, he wants to take her somewhere better, somewhere far away from New Mecca. He shows her the medal he received for his service in the war, explaining that he hadn't taken it off in 7 years as it was a reminder that he did something good once, and then throws it off the side of the building. When the little girl asks why he did that, he simply replies that he has other reminders now. This is Katana Zero, a game that asks the question, what do the soldiers fight for when there's no war left to fight? The two decide to stay and watch the lights a little longer, and while the little girl is worried that the men in masks will come back, Zero promises that he'll protect her no matter what. And with that, the next morning is Judgment Day, what we've been counting down to the whole game. Zero is woken up by the little girl who has prepared him a breakfast soup of fish heads and protein paste. Feeling bad about treating her like a gremlin, I reluctantly ate the soup, and after nearly dying there and then, I said it was my new favourite, only to find out that she thought it tasted bad anyway. The little girl lets Zero borrow Behemoth, saying that while he's around, she doesn't need it anymore. And with that warm feeling in our hearts, we head to the office. The psychiatrist isn't impressed with Zero and warns that this is his last chance. But after we reveal that we met Leon, the tables are turned, and we finally get to ask some questions. The psychiatrist reluctantly complies, confirming that Zero is indeed null, and that there aren't any records of his life prior to it. His aggression and psychopathy as a child played key roles in making him a candidate for the program, and his success in becoming a member in the most elite null unit, Gamma. So, just as Leon mentioned, Zero was given Kronos from childhood and trained as a super soldier for the sake of New Mecca. He, along with numerous others, were subjected to the treatment before the side effects of the withdrawal were fully known, and so as the war ended and the production of Kronos ceased, members of Null eventually started dying off one by one, until only a handful remained. Zero questions whether he too will die from withdrawal, to which the psychiatrist assures him that there is enough Kronos left for him, so long as he is compliant. With all the pieces together, we know now why we were sent after our targets. It's been the goal of the psychiatrist and his superiors to rehabilitate Zero in an effort to eliminate Kronos and all traces of it. Josh Rose's company was involved with moving Kronos after the war. The something redacted that Fa Yuan was leaking was likely Kronos as well. Alcazim had knowledge on how to make it, and Electra had. I want to go back to our encounter with him for a moment. If you choose to speak to him and go against the psychiatrist's warnings, you can actually learn about Kronos much earlier in the game. Electrohead explains that he had been taking a drug he found at a storage unit he purchased, and describes its effects as having altered his perception of time. As you continue to question him, he is eventually shot by V. If you choose to tell the psychiatrist that you spoke to Electrohead on the following day, he confirms that the drug is the same one Zero uses for his medicine. With his treatment done, we take the next dossier. This one tells us to eliminate all sensitive materials stored in Alcazim's bunker and leave no survivors. Upon arrival, you'll be met with either the receptionist again or an old man acting in her place. The reason for this change depends on how you treated her back at the hotel. If you were kind to her and she helped you leave the building, she'll be here again. But if you ended up antagonizing her, it's revealed at the end of that stage that she was eliminated to keep her quiet. Either way, once you get past the receptionist, Zero will make his way down the bunker. Each room is connected by an elevator to increasingly difficult encounters, and on a certain floor, we find numerous chambers housing what looks to be test subjects in some other program unrelated to Kronos. There's actually one of these tanks in an earlier stage when we fall through Alcazim's manor. The fact that he keeps people in test tubes hidden inside a mansion reveals to us that he's a Final Fantasy VII or Kingdom Hearts 2 fan.
Roxas.
Once we reach the end of the stage, we meet again with the woman in the mask, known only as Headhunter through the game's files. She serves as the final boss for the story and is armed with lasers, stun grenades, and machine guns. Being null, she proves to be the most challenging boss fight in the game. Or is she? After landing enough hits on her, she'll break the floor, dropping the two into the basement below. Headhunter realizes that Zero is Gamma Null, the same as someone she refers to as 15. She was under the belief that her and 15 were the only Null left. Putting the dots together tells us that she's talking about the dragon. She assumes that Zero must be there for the Kronos Alcazim had paid her as compensation for her work as an assassin. But when Zero denies this, she concludes that he must enjoy all the killing instead, saying that Kronos' ability to rewind time essentially grants him immortality. It makes the moment they take another's life the only time they can touch a death they'll never have. Even though their goals align, they realize that there isn't enough Kronos left for the two of them to work together. So out of desperation, Headhunter attacks Zero, hoping that there's enough left in his bloodstream for her to at least slow the withdrawals. The two face off in thousands of precognitive battles against each other until they reach one outcome where Headhunter drops her knife and... she pleads for Zero to kill the ones who did this to them, for her sake and for all the Null before them, before collapsing dead at his feet. Man, that's pretty rough, but at least we gave her an honorable death. But we need her head for the retinal scan to lock in the vault, so... Zero takes the Headhunter's head, nice one Justin, and uses her eyes to gain access to the vault and the contents he must destroy. Inside he finds a woman and her children, the sight of which then shifts into the house and child from his dreams. Zero is prompted to kill the child repeatedly before recalling his conversation with the men at the bar. Until finally... he flees, failing his mission, leaving the targets alive and the psychiatrist at the end of his rope. We return to the office and see him frantically packing a suitcase. He exclaims that he hasn't been able to reach his daughter for some time, while bargaining to himself that he'll be able to explain the situation and that they won't come for him, implying that whoever he's working for has already silenced his family due to his inability to control Zero, who then attempts to confront him about his dreams being real, claiming that the psychiatrist knew all along that they were his memories, and the two come to one final exchange. This goes on for a little while. After searching his body, we find a new mecha government keycard revealing who the psychiatrist was working for, and when we search his suitcase, we find one last dossier. Subject 0, Null Executioner Class Gamma Squadron, a high-value government contractor that must be eliminated discreetly upon questioning their role or gaining knowledge about Kronos. We return the dossier after learning the true intentions of the psychiatrist and return home. Once back, we find Zero's apartment at the center of a crime scene. The neighbor next door is dead, and there's a note pinned to our wall. One life for another. Somebody has broken in, and the little girl has gone missing. Despite this, the questions of her whereabouts fall on deaf ears. The landlady claims to have never seen a little girl in the building, which Zero refutes, describing her appearance and approximate age of 5 years old. He explains that she's the daughter of his neighbor, but the landlady once again states that there are no children living in the building, and that Zero's neighbor lived alone. The police back her up, saying that he was a junkie loner with no kids. Growing suspicious of Zero, they attempt to bring him in for questioning, but he escapes. The police confirm among themselves that Zero matches the profile of someone they're searching for. The child in the dreams wasn't Zero. Instead, he was the man who shot the scientist, and the one who picked up the Leviathan toy in the house. explaining why we found it under his couch 7 years later. After finishing his report, we see him reconvene with the man known as the Dragon, being referred to as 15, showing us that the two were allies in the war. As the credits begin to roll, we see Snow conversing with a shadowy man, explaining that V has been killed, and as the two prepare to wage war against the government, 15 is shown planning his next move with a lifeless V in the other room. And lastly, we see the little girl crying in a black void, comedy and tragedy mocking her and the player as the game comes to an end. Now that we're done with the main story, I wanted to get into a few of the game's secrets and some theories for what might actually be happening. First off, after completing the game, you get access to a speedrun in hard mode, as well as a new government laboratory stage thanks to the psychiatrist's ID card. But it isn't a full level like the others and acts more like a hub for the collectibles. By doing certain things throughout your playthrough, like bludgeoning Josh Rose with a bust, you can get access to up to 5 different types of swords with special abilities. For example, there's one that makes blood sprays rainbow instead of red, and another that makes your sword shoot a beam of energy like the Master Sword from The Legend of Zelda. It's pretty fun trying to get these swords, so I recommend trying it for yourself. Towards the back of the room, you can also find an elevator with a message saying to check back in a few months. I assume that this was originally meant to be for the DLC, but considering it's been 5 years since then, we'll just ignore it. Speaking of DLC, there was an April Fool's update for the game in 2023 on PC called Katana Hero. It reframes the story as a bootleg action flick where Zero does battle against spirits but mostly just changes the dialogue, kind of like Kung Pao or early localizations of anime that redo the original script. Oh yeah, and it also changes the secret boss fight. What's that? I didn't mention a secret boss. Oh. Well. That's right. If you play through the game while trying your hardest to annoy the psychiatrist, instead of introducing his head to a rock, we fight a powered up super psychiatrist god Super Psychiatrist. He says his abilities come from some other war drug not related to Kronos, and while I can't speak for whether or not this is canon, it does make for a more fitting final battle than Headhunter if you ask me. This is the hardest boss in the game and has some Akira-esque visuals that can get kinda gory, so if you want to fight him yourself, this is how you do it. Luckily, if you've already completed the game, you don't have to go through the whole thing again. Just choose to start from the beginning of each stage or session with the psychiatrist as follows. First, when you receive the call at the start of the factory level, repeatedly hang up until the responses stop changing, and then answer the call with a "hello?" and complete the mission. Then, during your first session with the psychiatrist, cut him off by demanding your medicine until he gives up. Do this again in the session after your visit to the hotel. In the club, speak to Electro Head, and in the session after, keep asking questions about the medicine and then refuse it. Kill all the guards in the prison, then skip to the session right before the Chinatown level and tell them if all these steps have been done correctly, the boss fight will start in the last session right after the final bunker stage. You'll know you got it when the psychiatrist catches Zero's punch. Defeating him here doesn't impact the ending of the game, so it really is just a bonus fight, but a welcome one nonetheless, and like I said earlier, it makes for a good final boss. And now let's talk theories. There are 2 that I'll be focusing on because I personally find them the most interesting, and with how much the game leaves up in the air, it will take way too long to go over every single one. Alright, so on to the first. The person we play as is actually the boy in the dream and not Zero, who is a completely different person we haven't met yet. There are a few key details that support this. One is that the dreams are shown through the boy's perspective, which wouldn't make much sense if we're the one who walks through the door after. The flashback showing 0 and 15 can be taken as a true recount of the events 7 years ago, so us seeing them together is a part of the story and doesn't rely on a specific narrator, unlike the dream. I should mention that the Zero in the flashback also uses a gun, which contradicts the psychiatrist's surprised reaction when he thought the player used one to kill Electrohead. Considering he knows about Zero's past, why does the idea of the protagonist using a gun shock him if he's really Zero? The next is that 15 and Headhunter don't seem to recognize the player despite at least 15 and Zero having worked together. You could say that 15 is suffering from amnesia as well, but there really isn't anything to suggest that. And the idea that both 0 and 15 could receive an injury bad enough to cause amnesia is a bit of a stretch with how strong they are. Additionally, the player is said to be too young to have been in the war according to the veterans at the bar, though I'll admit that this point is a bit contentious. We know that according to Zero's dossier that he's 22 during the events of the game, making him 15 during the war, which would definitely explain why he looks so young. And I believe the developers also mentioned that the null treatment also blocks pubescent development in their subjects, meaning that Zero would still likely look around 15 or so in the present. But the main reason why I bring this up is because the child from the flashback would also be around 15 years old in the present if we compare his build to the little girl's, who the player approximated as being roughly 5 and then age him up by 7 years. And while that might be grasping at straws, when the homeless veteran has a closer look at the player, he accuses him of being a Cro-Mag, which the child would have had to have been. And we don't actually see Zero kill the child in the flashback, so for all we know he could have been taken in and put through the Null program to eventually be used to tie up loose ends about Kronos in the present. But the player finding Leviathan under his couch does kind of blow a hole in this theory. The second theory is that the little girl isn't real. This one is a bit more common as throughout the game the player is the only one who can seemingly see and interact with her. She also resembles the child that gets changed into Leviathan in Zero's dream, who appears before Zero actually meets the little girl. It's been theorized that she could be some sort of personification of Zero's psyche, ranging from his remaining childhood innocence to the guilt of his war crimes or simply some kind of hallucination gremlin. But there are a few counterpoints to this. The little girl says that she was given the tape of Zero's neighbors and even describes V as having weird hair, which Zero shouldn't know about at that point. She also cleaned his apartment and made him breakfast. And I mean, Zero could have done all this by himself and imagined that the child did it, but that's a little too much. And finally, the little girl interacts with comedy and tragedy, although whether they're real or not is dubious as well, with the only thing suggesting that they exist is that one police officer who seems to react to them. But for all we know, this could have something to do with Zero's abilities as Null. Those are the two theories that I wanted to talk about, and if you have any of your own, please let me know, I'd love to read them. And with that, here are my final thoughts about Katana Zero. I think it's a great game packed with a lot of charm, secrets, and fun dialogue, but while it does almost everything right, the game does leave a few too many questions unanswered. Maybe the DLC will change this, but regardless, it's still one of my favorite indie games more than 5 years later. If you haven't already, try the game out for yourself to see what I missed, or if you have and have anything you want to share, go ahead. This was my first video in this style, and I hope you enjoyed it. I chose Katana Zero as my first attempt because I thought the short playtime would be a good learning experience, but with how dense the story turned out to be, I found myself needing to include a lot of little details to help contextualize the latter half of the game. I plan to make more videos like this along with the anime related content that's been on the channel so far, so like it if you liked it and subscribe if you're new. I have a Twitter you can follow, so why not check it out? Most of my followers right now are bots and that's just kinda sad, so I'd appreciate it. This has been Combo Trigger, but until next time, take care.